My son dropped me off at the hospital and never came back. I thought maybe something happened to him until I checked my bank account and saw it drained. He took my insurance money while I was recovering from a stroke. Before I begin my story, I just want to say thank you for listening to me pour my heart out. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love hearing from you. And if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. It helps me more than you know. I woke up to a ceiling I didn't recognize, and 4 in my arm, and a monitor beeping too loud for my liking. My throat was dry, my tongue heavy, and there was a strange pressure on the left side of my face. Took a few seconds before I realized where I was and why. Hospital. That word hit like a brick. I remembered sipping my peppermint tea on the porch when my hand started trembling. Then my mouth went numb. I dropped the cup and knocked over the little side table. I managed to call Reggie, my son. He came quick, or at least he sounded like he did over the phone. Told me not to worry, that everything would be okay, that I'd be in good hands. He held my purse in one hand and my shoulder with the other as they wheeled me into that ambulance. That was the last time I saw him. The nurse checked my vitals later that morning. I asked, "Has my son been by?" She hesitated, looked down at her clipboard like the answer was written there somewhere. "Not today, Miss Shaw, but maybe later." Later came and went. So did the next day. Then the next. No flowers, no fresh clothes, no one. By the 4th day, I stopped asking the nurses. By the 5th, the discharge nurse looked at me with pity in her eyes and said, "Do you have someone picking you up?" I lied. Said yes. I took those discharge papers in one shaky hand and called a cab with the other. Thank God I still had $20 tucked behind my ID card. I hadn't touched it since Christmas. The cab driver didn't talk much. I appreciated that. My voice still felt like it belonged to someone else, slurred and weak. When we pulled up to my house, everything looked still and cold. The porch light was out. My little potted plants were dying, their leaves brown and curled. The mail was stacked high on the steps, untouched. I opened that front door and stepped into my living room, expecting the familiar warmth of home. But all I got was quiet, the kind that doesn't comfort you. It suffocates you. And something felt wrong. I walked over to the kitchen counter to check my calendar, and nearly slipped on an envelope that had been shoved under the door. It was a hospital bill, but it was already marked paid in full. I furrowed my brow, confused. I hadn't paid anything. I didn't even know how much the bill was supposed to be. I hadn't seen it yet. Something cold settled in my stomach as I tried to log into my online bank account. My usual password didn't work. I tried another one. Locked out. So I called the bank and waited 43 minutes on hold before someone finally answered. "Ma'am, I see here that the password and contact number were updated 2 days ago." "By who?" I asked, though I already knew the answer was going to hurt. "Mr. Reggie Shaw. He was listed as your authorized party." I almost dropped that phone. That was the first knife in my chest. Then came the second one, deeper and sharper. I called my insurance company to ask about the billing situation. That's when the representative cheerfully told me my supplemental policy payout had already been processed. $18,000, she said, like it was some kind of miracle. "What payout?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Your critical recovery benefit. It was filed last week. The funds were released and deposited into the account ending in 0944. I never filed anything." My hands were shaking now. "Can you tell me the name on that account?" I asked. "Reggie Shaw," she said. "It says here he's your son." That was the moment I stopped shaking. Not because the fear was gone, but because the fury had arrived. I thanked her politely, hung up that phone, and sat down in the kitchen chair where I used to grade Reggie's homework when he was small. Where I used to cry over bills and pray after long days at work and plan his birthday cakes on a little notepad. That chair still had scratches in the wood from his toddler years when he'd bang his toy cars against the legs. It still had his initials carved in the underside from when he was 12 and thought he was so clever. And now that same boy had used my own name to steal my future. If you think what he did was wrong, write shame in the comments. If you think I'm overreacting, write family. I want to know where your heart stands on this. He didn't just take money from me. He took my dignity, my security, and every ounce of faith I had left in him. Left me lying in that hospital bed alone, while he was probably out there smiling for Instagram pictures and drinking champagne with his girlfriend Candace. That night I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened my hallway closet and dug out an old manila envelope with a card I hadn't touched in 22 years. It was from a girl named Sonia Blanchard, one of my brightest former students from back when I was teaching. She'd sent it after she passed the bar exam, said, "If you ever need me, Miss Shaw, I'll be there." I picked up that phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Blanchard Law, this is Sonia." "Sonia," I said. "It's Miss Shaw." She gasped. "Miss Shaw. Oh my goodness, is everything okay?" "No," I said quietly. "But it's about to be." I told her everything. About the hospital, the account changes, the fake insurance claims, the forged access to my personal information. She didn't interrupt me once, just listened like the good student she used to be, taking notes I could hear scratching across paper. When I finished talking, her voice had changed completely. Gone was the sweet girl I remembered. In her place was a lawyer who meant business. "Reggie messed with the wrong woman," she said, steel in her voice. "Good," I replied. "Because I'm not the same woman who raised him anymore." She set up a time to meet me in person the next day. Said she'd pull all the account activity and file an emergency freeze on everything. I gave her permission to act on my behalf, signed the papers right there over the phone with a witness listening. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. Not because I had my money back yet, but because I had something better. I had a plan. They thought I was too old, too slow, too tired to notice what they were doing. They forgot who taught them how to play the game in the first place. Now it was my turn. And I wasn't coming to talk. I was coming to take back what was mine. Sonia didn't waste any time. By the next morning, she had pulled my complete financial file, verified every one of those forged documents, and filed a financial fraud report with my insurance company. She also walked me through changing all my banking credentials, setting up identity protection, and requesting a complete statement of every transaction linked to my name over the last 3 months. She read every detail out loud so I could hear it all for myself, and let me tell you, it was worse than I thought. There it was, clear as day. 3 separate claim payments. $18,000, $12,000, and another $6,000. All using my name, my policy number, my social security number, deposited into an account registered under a fake company called Shaw Wellness Consulting. I nearly choked when she told me that. That boy created a company in my name? I asked. Sonia sighed, and I could hear her anger building. He filed the LLC online, used a third-party banking platform to open a business account. That's how he funneled the money without it looking suspicious. He thought he was being clever. She paused. He wasn't clever. He was cowardly. But Sonia had discovered something else that stunned me even more. He had been rerouting my monthly disability check too. That little bit I received every month, barely enough to cover my prescriptions and groceries, was being diverted into another one of his accounts. He'd submitted a change of address form to Social Security and told them I'd moved in with him to save money. I hadn't seen Reggie's doorstep in over a year, and here he was telling the government we were living together like some happy little family. I don't want just a refund, I told Sonia, my voice steady and cold. I want justice. You'll get it, she promised me. She asked if I wanted to press charges right away or wait a little longer. Wait, I said. I want him to feel safe first. Let him think he got away with it. Because this wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. This was about watching the fear creep across his face when he realized the ground underneath him wasn't just shaking. It was completely gone. 2 weeks passed, and I said nothing to Reggie about what I knew. He called once, acting like nothing had happened, like he hadn't left his mother stranded in a hospital room. Hey Ma, he said, casual as you please. Just checking in on you. You doing good? Oh, I'm doing just fine, I said sweetly, like butter wouldn't melt in my mouth. Just taking it slow. Resting up like the doctor said. That's good, that's real good. Hey listen, Candace and I are thinking of starting a business together, something wellness focused, you know? Helping people get their lives back on track. I wanted to spit right through that phone. Instead I said, sounds wonderful, baby. Just be careful who you trust in business. He laughed, actually laughed. Always, Ma. Always gotta watch your back out here. When we hung up, I sat in that kitchen chair staring at the wall for a long time. Not angry anymore, not heartbroken either. It's a strange thing when your heart stops hurting over someone. You expect to feel peace, but what you really get is clarity. You see the truth for exactly what it is. Not colored by hope, not softened by old memories, just sharp, brutal fact. Reggie didn't love me. Not in any way that counted anyway. He loved what I gave him, what I sacrificed for him, what I saved up for his future. He loved the comfort I provided, the food I cooked, the bills I paid when he was struggling. He loved the foundation I built under his feet, but he never once looked down to see what it cost me to lay those stones. He saw me as a liability, an old woman with shaky hands and a brain he thought was too fogged up to notice him stealing right from under my nose. But I noticed everything. And I remembered it all. Drop a heart in the comments if you've ever been underestimated because of your age. Let me know I'm not alone in this. Sonia had filed all the paperwork we needed. A civil suit for fraud, an insurance investigation that would put his fake company under a microscope, and a quiet freeze on all accounts connected to Shaw Wellness Consulting. It would take another week or two for the banks to finish their audit and investigation. Until then we waited. And I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I was still standing when he thought he'd knock me down for good. That Saturday, I went to the grocery store near my neighborhood for the first time in weeks. I took my time walking those aisles, leaning on the cart for balance, letting myself feel normal again. People nodded at me politely. The cashier smiled wide and asked how I was feeling. But right there in the frozen food section I saw him. Reggie. He was walking ahead of me with Candace, pushing a cart full of wine bottles, expensive steaks, and name-brand everything. She was talking fast like she always did, pointing at things and throwing them in the cart without even looking at the prices. He was nodding and laughing, looking like the good provider, the successful man. My blood didn't boil when I saw them. It froze solid. I stepped back down the other aisle and waited for them to pass. When they were gone, I came back out and finished my shopping, but I left that store knowing one thing for certain. They were about to lose everything they thought they owned. The next week, Sonia called me with the news I'd been waiting for. "It's time," she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Everything's been confirmed. All the documentation is solid. Are you ready for this?" "More than ready," I told her, and I meant every word. The following Friday, Reggie and Candace hosted a small cookout in their backyard. Family, a few of his friends, some people from church. I wasn't invited, of course, but I showed up anyway. I wore my best white dress, the one I saved for special occasions, and I carried a fresh lemon pie I'd baked that morning. When Candace opened that back door, her face just dropped. "Miss Evelyn," she stammered. "Oh, hi. We weren't expecting." "I know," I said calmly. "I just thought I'd stop by. I brought pie." She blinked at me like she couldn't process what was happening. That's real sweet of you." Reggie appeared right behind her, and when he saw me standing there, confusion and nervousness flickered across his face. "Ma, what are you doing here?" "Just wanted to see how my investments were doing," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. He looked confused, maybe even a little scared. "You're what?" I walked right past him into that backyard and handed my lemon pie to a woman from church who was standing near the food table. Then I turned around and handed Reggie a manila envelope. "What's this?" he asked, his voice smaller now. "Your future," I said simply. He opened it with shaking hands and froze completely. Inside was the court summons, the civil suit paperwork for fraud, all the insurance documentation, and a printed spreadsheet showing every single dollar he'd taken from me, down to the cent. Candace read over his shoulder, and her face went pale as milk. "You told me that money was from a work bonus," she whispered. Reggie didn't speak, just stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. I patted his shoulder gently, like I used to when he was little and scared. "Good luck at the hearing, baby," I said sweetly. "I hear judges don't take too kindly to elder fraud these days." And then I walked out of that backyard without saying another word, because some things don't need to be shouted. They just need to be served cold. It was quiet for 2 whole days after that cookout. No phone calls, no text messages, no Facebook posts from Reggie trying to act like everything was normal. I expected that silence. His quiet was never out of respect for other people. It was always out of fear for himself. I could picture him sitting on the edge of his bed with that envelope still in his hands, probably reading through those papers for the 10th time, trying to figure out how I'd managed to pull it all together. How the woman he'd left alone in a hospital bed had somehow flipped the whole script on him. But I wasn't alone. Not really. I had Sonia, and I had my memory, and I had 22 years of teaching children that actions have consequences. I spent those 2 quiet days cleaning my house, not rushing around to keep busy, but moving with real intention. I pulled old picture frames off the shelves, wiped them down with a warm cloth, and took a good long look at each one. Reggie as a toddler with spaghetti sauce all over his chubby face. Reggie in his cap and gown, holding his high school diploma with that crooked grin I used to love so much. Me and Reggie at his wedding 3 years ago, when I didn't know yet how much that smile was going to cost me in the end. I dusted every single one of those frames, kissed the glass gently, and then put them all in a cardboard box. I wasn't erasing him from my life, but I wasn't going to keep honoring someone who treated me like an afterthought either. On the 3rd morning, my phone rang while I was stirring oatmeal and humming along to the radio. When I saw his name flash across that screen, I didn't pick up. Let it go to voicemail. He tried again. And again. On the 4th call, I finally answered. "Ma, please," he said, and his voice sounded broken. I didn't say anything back. Just listened to him breathe into that phone. "Ma, I didn't know what I was doing. I thought you were going to be okay eventually. I thought you'd get the money back somehow. It wasn't supposed to go this far. You filed a fake business under my name," I said calmly, stirring my oatmeal like we were discussing the weather. "You diverted my disability income. You forged signatures on legal documents. You filed 3 separate fraudulent insurance claims using my private health records." He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear him breathing hard. "I was just trying to get ahead financially," he mumbled. "By stepping on your mother to do it. It wasn't like that." "Then explain it to me," I said. "Help me understand." But he couldn't. All he said was, "I didn't mean to hurt you." I waited for more. For the part where he apologized without making excuses. For the moment when he admitted he'd done it out of pure greed, not necessity. But it never came. Instead, he asked if I could talk to Sonia, maybe work something out. Said the court case was ruining everything for him. That Candace had packed up and left. That the business account was frozen and he couldn't pay his rent. I stirred my oatmeal one more time and took a deep breath. "I'm sorry you're struggling, Reggie. I truly am. But you had 2 choices when I was lying in that hospital bed. You picked the one where I stop being your mother and start being your consequence. That's cold, Ma. So was leaving me alone in that hospital bed." And I hung up before he could say another word. If you've ever had to choose between being nice and being respected, let me know in the comments. Write respect, if you think I did the right thing. The next week was like a whirlwind. But Sonia had everything moving like clockwork. The insurance investigation was officially opened, and their legal team had verified every single forged claim, every fake document, every account that had been opened using my personal information. The civil suit was scheduled for a hearing in 3 weeks. Reggie was being charged with elder financial abuse and identity fraud, which could mean jail time if we pushed for it. But Sonia said we were going to press for full restitution instead. I didn't need him sitting in a jail cell somewhere. I needed him to live with the weight of what he'd done every single day, while he rebuilt his life from absolutely nothing. In the meantime, Sonia helped me set up what she called a recovery account. The insurance company had already agreed to refund all my benefits due to the verified fraud. A restitution claim was also filed with the bank, and they'd frozen all the accounts and begun legal forfeiture proceedings. I received my first reimbursement check by certified mail that Friday. $36,000. I stared at that envelope for a long time before I opened it. Not because of the amount, though it was more money than I'd seen at one time in years, but because of what it represented. That money had been stolen from me, taken behind my back while I was unconscious in a sterile hospital room, eating Jell-O off a plastic tray and wondering if my own son would ever walk through that door to see how I was doing. He never did. But this envelope came with something more valuable than money. Came with accountability. I deposited that check and then sat down with Sonia to plan what came next. We agreed I'd set aside some money for home improvements. New carpet for the living room, a better heater for the winter months, maybe even that electric recliner I've been looking at for years. But more importantly, we decided to set up a foundation. I called it the Evelyn Shaw Emergency Fund, A small, quiet program that would help elderly women who'd been caught up in financial abuse, especially those who'd been targeted by their own family members. I wasn't trying to start some big charity organization. I was building an escape route for women like me. Women who'd given everything they had and been left with nothing to show for it, except empty bank accounts and broken hearts. Reggie didn't call me again, but Candace did. She left a voicemail message that I played 3 times before I decided what to think about it. She said she didn't know what Reggie had really been doing with that money. Said she was sorry I'd been dragged into their mess. That if she'd known the truth, she would have spoken up and tried to stop it. That she never wanted things to turn out this way for anybody involved. She didn't ask me for forgiveness, and I respected that about her. I didn't call her back though. Forgiveness wasn't completely out of reach, but it wasn't something I owed anybody either, no matter how sorry they claimed to be after the fact. A few days later, I saw Reggie at the pharmacy while I was picking up my blood pressure medication. He was waiting in line ahead of me, shoulders hunched over, looking like the weight of everything had finally settled into his spine where he couldn't ignore it anymore. I didn't speak to him. I didn't glare at him. I just stood there quietly waiting my turn. He turned around and saw me standing there. Our eyes met for just a second. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but I shook my head once very slightly. He closed his mouth and left the pharmacy without getting whatever he'd come for. I paid for my pills and walked out feeling lighter than I had in years, because he could keep his silence. I'd already found my peace without needing to hear another word from him. I didn't tell many people the whole story of what had happened. Not because I was ashamed of anything, but because I wanted to hold it close to my chest. Letting it spread all around town would have made everything messier and louder, and I didn't need that kind of attention. I didn't need anyone's pity. I didn't need to hear "poor Evelyn" whispered behind my back after church dinners, or have women hugging me with their eyes full of sorrow like I was some tragic figure. I'd already had my fill of empty sympathies from people who meant well but couldn't really help. What I needed now was forward movement. So I moved forward. I started my mornings early, wiping down that old wooden table in the kitchen where I'd first taught Reggie to write his name in crayon when he was 4 years old. Funny how that same little boy would grow up to use my name to steal from me decades later. Still, I wiped that table clean every morning, humming old hymns while I worked. It wasn't grief that slowed me down anymore. It was the weight of understanding that healing doesn't always come from being held by other people. Sometimes it comes from learning how to hold your own line and not let anybody cross it. With the emergency fund now officially set up and the first donation pledged by Sonia herself, I walked into the community center one Tuesday morning with a file folder under my arm and my best cardigan over my shoulders. The meeting room was smaller than I'd imagined, but the energy in it felt solid and real. 3 older women were already seated when I arrived. One wore a colorful scarf wrapped around her head. One had thick reading glasses that made her eyes look huge, and the third had a wooden cane resting against her chair. All 3 of them turned when I walked through that door, and when they smiled at me I saw it immediately. Recognition. Not of me personally since we'd never met before, but of the pain I was carrying, of the fight that had brought me there. I introduced myself quietly, told them just enough of my story to let them know I'd been through something similar to what they were dealing with. One of them, Miss Bernadine, said her daughter had been slowly draining her checking account by helping with bills and groceries, taking a little extra each time until thousands of dollars had disappeared. Another woman, Gloria, said her grandson had used her credit card to buy an expensive phone and tried to blame it on hackers when she found out. The third woman, whose name was Catherine, didn't share her story that day. She just nodded quietly and held my hand a little longer than necessary when we were introduced. Sometimes that's all you need from someone. Just the knowing that you're not alone in what you've survived. We didn't spend that meeting crying over what had been done to us. We spent it planning what we were going to do next, how we were going to help other women avoid the same traps, how we were going to make sure nobody else had to learn these lessons the hard way. That night I stood on my front porch and watched the sun go down behind the trees at the end of my street. The sky was painted in soft blues and sharp golds, and the air smelled like rain coming in from the west. I made a promise to myself right there that whatever came next in my life, I wasn't going to just survive it. I was going to shape it with my own 2 hands. My life didn't end in that hospital bed when my son walked away. It restarted with clarity, with purpose, and with a sharpened understanding of what it really means to reclaim not just your money, but your voice and your dignity. The next morning, Sonia called me with news about the court date. It was confirmed for the following Thursday. Reggie would have to stand before the judge and answer for what he'd done. She'd already spoken to the prosecutor and presented the complete fraud record we'd put together. There was enough evidence to bury him legally if I wanted to push for jail time. But I didn't want him in prison. I wanted something better than that. I wanted repayment. I wanted every single cent he'd taken returned to where it belonged. I wanted every sleepless night he'd caused me to be compensated. I wanted every ounce of pride he'd stripped away from me to cost him something he'd actually feel in his bones. Let him keep walking around free, but let him walk around broke and ashamed. Sonia was prepared to argue for maximum restitution and an enforceable garnishment order. He'd be paying me back monthly for the next 10 years minimum, and if he defaulted on even one payment, we'd seize whatever pitiful accounts he tried to hide behind fake names. She'd even filed a freeze on any future tax returns he might receive. If he tried to run from his responsibilities, his own money would chase him down wherever he went. That felt like enough justice to me. Later that afternoon, I walked into the hair salon on Main Street, the same one I hadn't visited in months because I'd been too depressed and too broke to care about how I looked. The women who worked there knew me well, maybe too well, but nobody asked me any questions more complicated than trim or color today, Miss Evelyn? I smiled at them and said, both. They actually cheered and pulled me over to the chair like I was some kind of celebrity. By the time I walked out of that salon, my gray curls had shape and bounce again. My eyebrows were neat. My cheeks held just enough color to make me feel fresh and alive. I looked like myself again, not the confused, abandoned version that Reggie expected to leave behind in a hospital gown, barely aware of what was happening around me. I looked like a woman who was very much alive and very much done being underestimated. I stopped by the grocery store and picked up fresh okra, a few ripe pears, and a lemon pie that was on sale. Then I made one final stop before going home. Reggie's apartment complex. It wasn't far from my house, just 2 turns off the main road and up a hill with cracked sidewalks and weeds growing through the pavement. I knew he wouldn't be expecting me, especially now that Candace had moved out and left him to face his consequences alone. The mailbox by his door was rusted and dented. There was a package sitting on his front step that looked like it had been there for days. I didn't knock on that door. Instead, I taped a copy of the court filing to it, right where he couldn't miss it when he came home. And on top of that legal document, I taped a receipt showing the insurance refund check I'd received, with my name and the recovered amount clearly visible, along with a short note I'd written in my best handwriting. You took what you thought I'd never miss. Now watch how far I make it go. I didn't wait around to see if he came outside or if he read it right away or if he tore it up in a fit of anger. I just walked back to my car in complete silence, listening to nothing but the sound of my heels on the concrete and the wind rustling through my coat. That night, I cooked okra stew with cornbread and sat down at my kitchen table with a tall glass of sweet tea. My television was playing softly in the background, some old rerun from the 90s, but my eyes were focused on the framed certificate Sonia had given me earlier that week. It read Evelyn Shaw, founder, Shaw Emergency Fund for Elder Protection, established 2025. I traced the edge of that frame with my finger and smiled, not because I was happy about what had brought me to this point, but because I was proud of what I'd built from the ashes of my son's betrayal. Every dollar Reggie would be forced to pay back wouldn't just sit in my personal account gathering dust. It would go toward helping women like Miss Bernadine and Gloria and Catherine, women who'd been forgotten, underestimated, taken for granted by people who were supposed to love and protect them. He wasn't just going to pay for what he'd stolen from me. He was going to pay forward something much bigger than his crime. And that's the kind of debt that follows you for the rest of your life, the kind that changes how you see yourself in the mirror every morning. The day of the court hearing came faster than I'd expected. I spent the night before pressing my navy blue slacks and my soft yellow blouse, the one I usually saved for graduations and funerals. I didn't want to walk into that courtroom looking like a victim. I wanted to look like the woman Reggie had tried to erase and failed to destroy. When I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror that morning, I barely recognized the person staring back. Not because of age or wrinkles or gray hair, but because I was standing straighter than I had in years. Something heavy had finally been lifted off my shoulders, and it showed in every line of my posture. Sonia picked me up in a black sedan she'd borrowed from her law firm. She looked sharp as always, hair pulled back in a neat bun, glasses perched on her nose, legal folders organized in her lap. She greeted me with a quiet nod and asked, "Are you ready for this?" I didn't answer with words. I just nodded once, and we drove to the courthouse in comfortable silence. The courthouse wasn't anything special to look at. Plain brick building, faded American flag hanging limply in the still morning air. A few people loitering around the entrance with tired eyes and gas station coffee. But to me, that courtroom represented the place where I was finally going to breathe without anger sitting like a stone in my chest. Reggie was already there when we walked in, sitting about 3 rows ahead of us, head bowed low like he was praying or maybe just trying to disappear. He didn't have a lawyer with him, just himself in a cheap, wrinkled suit that didn't fit him properly, carrying the weight of every wrong decision he'd made over the past year. He didn't see me come in at first. I sat down next to Sonia and let him sweat in his ignorance for a few more minutes. When the judge finally entered and opened the court docket, flipping through papers and adjusting his reading glasses, the whole room went quiet. He spoke into that silence like he'd done it 1,000 times before, but when he called Reggie's name and started reading the charges out loud, it didn't feel like just another case on his schedule. It felt deeply personal. "Mr. Reggie Shaw, you are charged with the following: financial fraud, identity theft, forgery of legal documents, and elder exploitation," the judge said in a clear, steady voice. "Do you understand these charges as they've been presented?" Reggie stood up slowly, his legs shaking slightly. "Yes, Your Honor." Sonia stood up next and presented our case with no frills, no unnecessary emotion, just the cold, hard facts laid out like evidence at a crime scene. Reggie had filed false insurance claims using my personal information. He'd created a fake business name to launder the payouts, so they wouldn't be traced back to him immediately. He'd rerouted my monthly disability checks into his own accounts for nearly 5 months. She submitted bank statements, notarized documents, printed emails, and even screenshots of text messages between Reggie and Candace where he joked about milking Mom's insurance policy. While I was still recovering from my stroke, the courtroom was completely silent as the judge flipped through each page of evidence. When he finished reading, he looked up at Reggie with the kind of expression that could freeze water. "Do you have anything to say before I make my ruling?" Reggie cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice sounded small and far away. "I didn't mean to hurt my mom," he said. "I was just in a really bad place financially. I thought she'd be okay in the end. I figured I'd find a way to replace the money before she even noticed it was gone. I didn't think she'd press charges against her own son." The judge raised one eyebrow. "So your defense is that you expected your victim to stay quiet about being robbed?" "No, sir. I just panicked when everything started falling apart. I messed up real bad." The judge turned to look at me directly. "Miss Shaw, would you like to address the court?" I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 73 years in my knees and back, but my spine was straight and my voice was clear. "Your Honor, my son left me alone in a hospital bed after my stroke. He used my medical emergency as an opportunity to steal from me, not as a chance to show love or care. And he didn't stop after one transaction. He kept going, kept taking, kept lying. He changed my passwords. He forged my signature on legal documents. He created an entire fake business to hide what he was doing. So yes, I noticed what he'd done. And yes, I pressed charges because if I hadn't stood up for myself, what would have stopped him from doing the exact same thing to another elderly woman somewhere else?" The judge nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Miss Shaw." I sat back down and squeezed Sonia's hand while we waited for the ruling. When it came, that judgment landed like thunder in that quiet courtroom. Reggie was found liable on every single civil count. The judge issued a full restitution order for $43,800 to be paid over the next 10 years, with automatic wage garnishment applied to any form of income he might receive. All the fraudulent accounts were permanently frozen. And here was the part that made my heart sing. If he missed even one monthly payment, a felony fraud case would be reopened and he'd face criminal sentencing that could put him behind bars for up to 5 years. It wasn't jail time, but it was something I thought might be even better. He'd be reminded of what he'd done to me every single month when that deduction hit his paycheck. Every time he looked at his bank balance, every job application he filled out, every tax season that rolled around. That was the kind of punishment that doesn't just hurt once and then fade away. It reshapes a man's entire life, one payment at a time. After the hearing ended, Reggie approached me in the hallway outside the courtroom. His voice was cracked and hoarse, his eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept in days. He looked like he'd lost 20 pounds since I'd seen him at that pharmacy. "Ma," he said, barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am." I didn't say anything back. Just stood there and let him talk. Ma Candace left me. She moved back in with her sister in Atlanta. The business is completely gone. I'm trying to find work, but with the account freeze and everything. His voice trailed off like he expected me to feel sorry for him. I held up my hand to stop him from saying anything else. "I didn't come here today to listen to you talk about your consequences," I said calmly. "I came here to collect what's rightfully mine." He blinked hard like he was trying not to cry right there in front of everybody. "I really messed everything up, didn't I?" "You didn't mess up," I corrected him. "You made choices. Over and over again you chose yourself over your mother. Now I'm choosing myself over my son." He tried to speak again, but I turned and walked away before he could get another word out. I was done listening to his excuses and his self-pity. I had better things to do with my time. Write justice in the comments if you think the judge made the right decision. Write forgive if you think I should have given him another chance. Later that evening, I sat on my front porch with a soft blanket over my knees, listening to crickets chirping in the bushes and sipping warm chamomile tea. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't triumphant either. I was still. The kind of deep stillness that comes after surviving a storm you never asked to weather in the first place. I opened the manila envelope Sonia had handed me on our way out of the courthouse. Inside was the formal court record, the official settlement terms, and documentation for the first automatic monthly restitution deposit. Direct bank transfer, impossible for him to stop or skip even if he tried. I flipped through those papers slowly, then placed them under my Bible on the side table. Then I walked into my kitchen and opened up a fresh notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote Shaw Emergency Fund Expansion Plan, in my best handwriting. Because while Reggie had stolen from me, he had also, without meaning to, funded something much bigger than his original crime. That restitution money wasn't just repayment for what he'd taken. It was going to be restoration for women who needed it. Every month for the next 10 years, his bank account would get smaller while I filled other women's cups. Women like Miss Bernadine and Gloria and Catherine. Women who'd been written off, forgotten, dismissed as too old or too confused to fight back. Reggie wasn't just paying for his own sins anymore. He was paying for something righteous and necessary. People think revenge has to be loud and dramatic. They think it's all fire and fury and screaming at the top of your lungs. But that's not how it really works, at least not for women like me. Women who are older, overlooked, underestimated by people who should know better. Real revenge is quiet. It's steady and patient. It's the sound of legal documents sliding across a wooden courtroom bench. It's your signature written in calm, sure handwriting on papers that will change everything. It's your own child staring at you from across a room, finally realizing you're not the fragile, helpless woman he thought he could fool and abandon. A month after the court ruling, the first restitution payment hit my bank account. $438.72. It wasn't the amount that mattered to me. It was the silence that came with it. No phone calls, no text messages, no attempts to negotiate or beg for mercy. Reggie had finally learned that this wasn't a discussion or a family disagreement. This was accountability, pure and simple. I didn't want his tears or his apologies anymore. I didn't care what Candace was doing in Atlanta or whether he was having trouble finding work. I cared that for the next decade, my name would appear on his bank statement every single month like a scar that wouldn't heal. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because if I didn't remind him of what he'd done, he'd eventually forget. And forgetting would mean he might do it again to somebody else's mother. I was still living in the same house, still had the same old furniture, and those lace curtains in the living room that my sister always said were outdated. But the air inside felt completely different now. It didn't feel heavy with worry and betrayal anymore. I could walk through my own home without feeling like someone else's shadow was lurking in the corners, waiting to take something else from me. No more wondering what Reggie might be planning behind my back. No more pretending he just needed time to grow up and do right. No more making excuses for someone who saw my love as weakness and my trust as opportunity. I didn't cry myself to sleep anymore. I started sleeping deeper and waking up earlier, ready to tackle whatever the day might bring. The community emergency fund was growing faster than I'd ever imagined it could. We hosted a small celebration lunch at the church basement. Nothing fancy, just ham sandwiches and sweet tea, and a sheet cake with Shaw Fund Launch written in blue icing. We didn't need some expensive banquet hall or fancy catered meal. We had something more valuable than that. We had stories. Women came up to me throughout that afternoon and whispered thank yous like I'd done something heroic. I hadn't done anything heroic. I just decided to stop being quiet about injustice. One woman named Doris told me her grandson had taken out a credit card in her name and used it to buy expensive sneakers and video games. She cried when I told her our fund would cover the consultation fee with a lawyer who could help her get it sorted out. Another lady, Miss Thelma, said her son had been collecting her Social Security checks for months without telling her. I thought I was just getting forgetful about money, she said. Turns out I was just trusting the wrong person. Those women reminded me exactly why I'd kept pushing forward, why I hadn't settled for an apology and a promise to do better, why I hadn't let Reggie sweet-talk his way out of facing real consequences. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every woman who gets told she's losing her mind when really someone else is just stealing her blind. A few weeks later, I was walking out of the pharmacy with my monthly prescriptions when I saw Reggie across the street. He didn't notice me at first. He was hunched over his phone, dressed in worn-out work clothes and looking like the weight of his choices had finally settled permanently into his shoulders. He looked tired, not the kind of tired that comes from honest work, but the kind that comes from being found out and having to live with the truth about yourself. He glanced up and saw me standing there. Our eyes met across that busy street. He didn't wave. He didn't smile or try to act like we were still family. He just stood there. And for a moment, I could see in his face that he finally understood something important. I wasn't his victim anymore. I wasn't someone he could manipulate or abandon or steal from. I was his consequence, walking around free and strong while he paid for what he'd done. I didn't cross the street to talk to him. I didn't offer him anything. I just turned and walked to my car. And that simple act felt more powerful than any angry words I could have shouted. The power wasn't in hurting him back. The power was in looking at him and feeling absolutely nothing except clarity. 2 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox with no return address. I recognized Reggie's handwriting immediately, though it looked shakier than I remembered. The letter said, "Ma, I know I don't deserve anything from you and I'm not asking for it. I just wanted you to know I got a job at a warehouse downtown. First steady work I've had in years. I'm not asking you to change the court ruling or forgive me or anything like that. I just wanted you to know I'm paying what I owe. And I'll never ask you to stop it. I'm sorry for everything. Reggie." I folded that letter and placed it in the same drawer with all the court records. Not because I needed to keep it for sentimental reasons, but because I wanted a reminder of what it had taken to reclaim my life and my dignity. Let me know in the comments if you think he really learned his lesson, or if he's just sorry he got caught. I'm curious what you think. The next weekend, Sonia took me to a ribbon-cutting ceremony for our new legal resource room at the community center. The local newspaper even sent someone to take pictures and write a little article about what we were doing. When they asked me to say a few words at the podium, I stood there in my Sunday best, looked out at a room full of faces, mostly women who understood exactly what I'd been through, and said this: I once trusted someone I loved not to betray me. I thought family meant protection. But when that trust was broken, I had two choices. I could stay silent and let it happen, or I could speak up and fight back. I chose my voice. And now, because I refuse to stay quiet, we're building something that will help other women find their voices too. They clapped until their hands hurt, and I stepped down from that podium feeling like I'd finally said everything I needed to say. Later that night, I sat on my porch with the newspaper clipping taped to my refrigerator and a photo from the ceremony in my lap. I looked out into the darkness, let the evening breeze wrap around my shoulders like an old friend's embrace. I had spent most of my life giving everything I had to other people. Giving my time, my money, my energy, my love, my trust. Now, for the first time, I had taken something back. Not out of anger or bitterness, but out of simple survival and self-respect. And from that day forward, every time I saw that monthly deposit appear in my bank account, I didn't think about Reggie or what he'd stolen or how he'd betrayed me. I thought about every woman who would never again have to doubt what she deserved, every grandmother who would never again be told she was too old or too confused to know when she was being cheated. That's what real justice looks like. Not punishment for its own sake, but transformation. Not just getting your money back, but getting your power back. Not just surviving what someone did to you, but making sure it never happens to anyone else. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like mine deserve to be heard, and women like us deserve to be believed. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know there are people out there who understand that staying silent isn't the same as keeping peace. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let someone get away with hurting you. Thank you for listening to my truth. Thank you for believing that an old woman's voice still matters in this world.